Okay, so you found a buyer or a buyer for your contract or property, and it's time to go to closing. You've submitted it to title, transaction coordinators moving towards the end. The final piece after the disposition side of it is going to go through and getting the closing scheduled. Now, if we're going to go through, as we're approaching the closing, I want to get a copy of the title commitment, a final copy of the title commitment to review it for accuracy. Some of the things that I want to make sure of is that the property address is correct. Now, don't even ask me why I say that. There was a property that was done. I'm not going to name any names or say anything about it, but the seller accidentally, and I say accidentally, the seller accidentally sold their homestead to the buyer and not their rental property. Their rental property was like a $40,000 pile of trash. But what the buyer actually bought, because all of the paperwork was transacted on the seller's personal residence, which was about a $350,000 house. So you can imagine the problems that showed up at closing after everything was signed off on, and the buyer literally purchased the seller's personal residence at title. So checking the property address is extremely important in this process. It seems ridiculous that you would have to do that, but double check the address, double check your seller's names, and make sure that the lender's names are correct on both the title commitment as well as your HUDs. Your HUDs will come up here in a second. The lender title policy is in place. What I mean by lender title policy is a lender can opt to pay an extra couple $100 in the event that the property is foreclosed on, that the title policy transfers to them. That's just something to double check on. Make sure that Schedule C is clear, that there are no exceptions to title. We've discussed that as well, and there's other video courses here in the Propelio Academy taught by Kane Title with Brittany Washington or Shyla Trout over at Rita McGee Law Firm. Both of those have came in and taught the escrow and closing process for the Propelio Academy. Verify that your close date is correct. And once you have done some of those basic things in the title commitment, you're going to want to verify that your HUDs are accurate. You're going to want to make sure that any realtor fees are accounted for, taxes are being paid by the appropriate parties, assignment fees are on the HUDs and in the correct location and the correct amounts, that any deposits that were put on file with you, the buyer or the seller, are accounted for on the HUD, that any earnest money delivered by any party is adequately accounted for, and that any survey costs or any additional fees are properly being allocated on the HUDs. I would say at least 7 out of 10 HUDs have an error on it when I receive it the first time around. So do pay close attention to your HUDs, or you will end up in a situation where you are paying or not being reimbursed for things that you should be getting paid for. If we're going to go through and do an assignments, we need to verify that we have blind HUDs and that my title company will be issuing blind HUDs to both my buyer and my seller. And then if I'm going to do double close, I need to verify both HUDs that are on the purchase transaction and the sale transaction are accurate in all of their information that we've already discussed. If there are any lenders involved, I'm going to want to verify that my buyer's lenders are ready to close and fund. So I try to get this all done within the last 48 hours. I want to stay on top of that ball, but within the last 48 hours, I'm really going to be making those phone calls to the lenders, to the buyer, to the title company, to the seller, to any lien holders that are getting payoffs. I'm going to be communicating with every single one of those religiously around the clock to verify that as we're approaching closing, that no items are left hanging out to dry. I need to make sure that everything is lining up so that way I can get to the closing and get this deal done. If I'm also doing a double close, remember I mentioned earlier, we need to schedule the seller in first, then my buyers, and then myself final, so that way all the paperwork gets signed in the correct order, so that way we can disperse funds at the end of the day and we can all get paid. If I need to have remote notaries established, remote notaries will go to the seller, will go to the buyer, will go to any party necessary to get this deal done, and they will get all the paperwork signed and notarized. You need to work with your title company to get those scheduled and then determine who's going to pay for them. Sometimes your title company will do that for you for free if you're doing a volume of transaction with them. Other times it'll cost you $75, $100, $150. But you're going to need your remote notaries scheduled in the event that you need them, okay? If you are working through and you have a rapport built with the seller, always try, no matter what, to get a testimonial from that seller at closing when they're right there in the moment and they're getting all of those, problems resolved. get the testimonial right then and there. If you can show up and get a video of it, that's even more powerful. That gives you extreme credibility. Take those videos, post them online, and then when you go through and you start establishing a credibility pack and you're working with these homeowners, you can say, hey, go check out my YouTube channel. There's 48 videos on there of sellers all saying that they've appreciated the process and the help that I have given them. So try and make sure you start building a collection of those up front. Do not, at the end of the day, just assume that the transaction is complete. You need to verify that funding has gone through. I will call the title company repeatedly. Has lender supplied capital? Has buyer supplied capital? Has seller received capital? Has capital been dispersed? Only once all of the capital has been dispersed is the transaction complete. I have seen instances where one party would initiate a demo on a property that was not closed yet. It would fail to close, and you can only begin to imagine the trouble that starts when that occurs. So always make sure that the funding is complete before any work is started, and at the point in time the funding is complete, your deal's done. So I really think that this was a relatively straightforward class. There's not a lot of difficult things to look at for closing, but making sure that your buyers show up with the right stuff, such as valid ID, that is something that does pop up often. So I'll rewind back to that for a second. Some sellers just get really weird about their issues with the government and refuse to get any form of valid ID. And if they refuse to get a form of valid ID, maybe they have their own reasons, but your title company may be forced to close using your seller and a credible person that basically says, I've known this seller for X amount of years. I'll do an affidavit of fact that this seller is the person that they're saying. Your title company may not even accept that. They need to get their ID. So push that seller as hard as you possibly can to get IDs in place up front and before closing, because you don't want to get to the day of closing and find out that seller does not have an ID and that they refuse to receive one or get one and completely blow your closing up. That is a quick tip that I can give you for closing. Other than that, I mean, being essentially the concierge, you might have to show up and grab the seller and drive them to the closing. You may have to do a lot of things to accommodate this seller, but there's gonna be situations that pop up that you're just gonna have to learn to address and deal as they come through. Closing should be one of the easier of them. That's about all I have to say on closing. Moving forward from there, I appreciate your time for joining the Propelio Academy. Don't forget to check out the rest of our videos and check it out on the next video.